We saw in the previous video that Latin America's early traditional parties originated as loose and informal social networks of elite and non-elite political activists. We also saw the example of the Colombian Liberal Party in the 1850s, which was one of the first parties in the region to develop a large base of mass support by aligning itself with a set of artisan organizations called the Democratic Societies. This alliance helped the party broaden its appeal to less affluent sectors of Colombian society, but it was still an entirely informal arrangement. For all of their influence in liberal politics, the Democratic Societies were not official local party organizations. And the informal nature of this relationship enabled subsequent liberal leaders like Rafael Núñez to dissolve the alliance when it no longer suited them. However, during the final decades of the 19th century, elite parties across much of Latin America start to organize on a more formal basis. They adopt official party statutes that regulate the various organizations that make up the party and define their powers, duties, and interactions. These parties also develop a much more complex ecosystem of committees, bodies, and organs, many of which are now organized on a permanent basis. These parties cease to be loose networks of local notables, and they transform instead into actual organizations and bureaucracies that are governed by their own set of well-established rules and procedures. For many Latin American elite parties, this process of formalization begins in the halls of Congress. Congressmen come to realize that they can get more things accomplished during a legislative session if they join together with other like-minded members of Congress into a caucus that imposes at least a minimal level of discipline upon its members and ensures that they all vote the same way. This unity of action strengthens the party's bargaining position as a whole, and it also helps individual members obtain support in Congress for their own bills and legislative projects. Over time, party elites also find it useful to create a separate leadership body that exists fully outside of the Congress. This body goes by a variety of names, but in many Latin American traditional parties, it is known as a directory, executive committee, or national commission. Many of the members of the party directory are sitting members of Congress, but the directory's function is a bit different from that of the caucus leadership. The directory is the day-to-day leadership body for the party as a whole, including segments of the party that exist outside of Congress. For example, when an opposition party like the Uruguayan Blanco Party calls on its rank-and-file members to participate in a partisan revolution, the party directory is the body that issues that call. When a party forms an electoral alliance with another party, those negotiations are usually carried out by the party's directories. One of the directory's tasks is to oversee the party bureaucracy, or the set of paid staff who help the party leaders manage the growing party organization. Party bureaucracies in Latin America are generally smaller than those of European parties during this period, but they still play an important role in administering the different bodies that make up the party, communicating on the party's behalf, and managing the party's finances. Around the turn of the 20th century, many elite parties also become more concerned with legitimizing themselves in the eyes of their supporters and the general public. And one of the ways that they do this is by establishing a national convention that plays at least a nominal role in selecting the party's leaders and national politicians. The convention is a gathering of politicians and ordinary party activists from across the country that lasts for a couple days every couple of years. At these meetings, the party's members elect the party's directory, choose the party's presidential candidate, and debate various other matters like the party's program and its overall strategy. Some party conventions in Latin America become quite powerful and influential, while others are more or less ignored by the party leaders. But in most cases, the convention is at least symbolically the highest organ of the party. It may meet for only a few days every couple of years, but when the convention is in session, the party's directory and its elected politicians are expected to show deference to the convention delegates and at least pretend to listen to what they have to say. One of the functions of the National Convention is to provide a formal role for the party's local organizations in its decision-making structure. Many of the men and women who serve as delegates to the convention are local activists who lead and staff the party's local branches, and the convention is the primary forum where these activists exercise their voice in party affairs. The size and scope of these local party organizations varies widely from party to party. In some parties, they take the form of municipal-level party branches that extend the party's reach into various cities, towns, and small villages. In other parties, the most important local organizations are neighborhood-level political clubs that might organize just a couple of city blocks. But regardless of their form and size, these local organizations are one of the main tools that parties use to run their electoral campaigns on the ground. They function as local campaign headquarters that carry out canvassing operations, organize campaign rallies, and transport voters to the polls. In some parties, these local organizations also stay mobilized even after the election is over, and they provide various services and events to the party supporters year-round. They are the party's primary link to the broader society. They are a physical place where people can go to if they want to get more involved in party activities or to obtain the party's help. They also provide political education to voters, and they are one of the main tools that these Latin American elite parties use to pull newly enfranchised voters into the party's orbit and integrate them into the internal life of the party. Not every elite party develops this type of organizational structure to the same degree or at the same time. In general, formal and permanent national party organizations are more useful to opposition parties because they provide additional coherence to an opposition movement that may not hold many elected positions. And they also help the opposition organize a coordinated electoral campaign that is capable of fighting back against the incumbent government's electoral interference. In most Latin American countries, the party organizations of opposition parties develop earlier and faster than the organizations of governing parties. For example, in Chile, the first two parties to develop national party organizations are the Conservative Party and the Radical Party, and both parties develop these structures at a time when they are in the opposition. The governing Liberal Party eventually develops a national party structure as well, but its party organization remains considerably weaker compared to those of the Conservative and Radical parties. In the next three videos, we are going to examine the early organizational developments of three of the most important pioneers of party organization in 19th century Latin America: the Radical Party of Chile, the Civil Party of Peru, and the Radical Civic Union of Argentina. In all three cases, these parties undergo their most extensive organizational changes at a time when they are still in the opposition. But these cases differ in how long that opposition period lasts. The Civil Party wins the national presidency almost immediately after it is founded, and its organizational development stalls and even erodes as a result. By contrast, the two radical parties spend most of their formative years in the opposition, and they end up as two of the best organized political parties in early 20th century Latin America.